Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks.
Few television series have managed to leave the kind of indelible mark on American culture that MASH did. Running for 11 seasons from 1972 to 1983, the show wasn't simply a sitcom about the Korean War. It was a mirror held up to the American soul during one of the most turbulent periods in the nation's history. It made audiences laugh, weep, and think deeply about the cost of war, the meaning of friendship, and the fragility of human life. But as beloved as the show became, its journey was far from smooth. Behind the cameras, a series of departures reshaped the series repeatedly, each exit leaving a permanent imprint on the story, the tone, and the legacy of the show. So what really drove some of the most beloved actors to walk away from one of television's greatest productions? The answers are more complicated, more human, and frankly more fascinating than most people realize. When McLean Stevenson stepped into the role of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake in 1972, he brought a bumbling warmth to the character that audiences adored. Blake was a commanding officer of the 4077th, well-meaning but perpetually overwhelmed, a man caught between military protocol and the anarchic genius of the surgeons under his command. Stevenson played him with effortless charm, earning a Golden Globe and the genuine affection of viewers across America. But Stevenson was restless. As the series evolved, it became increasingly clear that the creative heart of the show was beating loudest around Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. Alda wasn't just acting. He was writing, directing, and shaping the philosophical and emotional direction of the series. As Hawkeye grew into the moral conscience of the 4077th, other characters inevitably found themselves orbiting his gravitational pull. For a man of Stevenson's ambition, that orbit felt uncomfortably distant from the center. By the end of Season 3, Stevenson had made up his mind. He wanted top billing. He wanted to be the lead, not the lovable supporting player. He departed MASH convinced that the television landscape was wide open for a talent like his, that he could build his own vehicle and drive it straight to the top. What followed was one of Hollywood's more painful cautionary tales. His own sitcom failed quickly. A follow-up project did even worse. The solo stardom he had envisioned never materialized, and in later interviews, Stevenson spoke with evident regret about leaving the show behind. The role of Henry Blake, the one he had walked away from, turned out to be the defining performance of his career. But here is the irony that makes his story so poignant. His departure gave MASH one of its most powerful moments. The writers, refusing to offer a comfortable send-off, killed Henry Blake off-screen in the final minutes of the Season 3 finale. Radar's quiet, devastating announcement in the operating room, delivered while surgeons were mid-procedure, stopped the nation cold. It was the first time a beloved sitcom character had been killed without warning, and it signaled to audiences everywhere that MASH was not playing by ordinary rules. Stevenson's exit, painful as it was personally, gave the show its soul. If McLean Stevenson left with a bang, Wayne Rogers left in near silence, and that silence turned out to be entirely intentional. Rogers played Trapper John McIntyre, Hawkeye's closest friend and partner in mischief during the show's first 3 seasons. The chemistry between Rogers and Alda was undeniable. Their banter crackled, their friendship felt genuine, and together they embodied the irreverent spirit that made the early seasons so irresistible. Audiences loved them as a duo. The trouble was that Rogers had signed on expecting an ensemble show, a true partnership, where screen time and narrative weight were shared. What he found instead was a series gradually consolidating itself around one central figure. Trapper John went from co-lead to supporting player. His lines grew shorter. His storylines grew thinner. And for Rogers, a man with a serious intellectual curiosity and a deep investment in the craft of storytelling, this wasn't simply a matter of wounded pride. It was a question of whether the show was using its characters honestly. Rogers chose to leave quietly at the end of Season 3. Here's the detail that makes his exit legally fascinating. He had never actually signed a formal contract with the production. His agreement had been made on a handshake. When producers threatened legal action, they discovered they had no ground to stand on. Rogers simply walked away, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. His replacement, Mike Farrell, as B.J. Honeycutt, took the series in a noticeably different direction. Warmer, more introspective, more emotionally layered. Many fans mourned the loss of Trapper's chaotic energy. And yet, in his absence, MASH arguably became a deeper and more mature piece of television. Rogers himself went on to build a remarkably successful second career in finance, becoming a well-respected investment commentator and market analyst. He had studied history at Princeton and possessed a sharp, analytical mind that translated seamlessly into the world of economics. By any measure, he landed on his feet, and landed well. When he passed away in 2015, his former co-star Alan Alda remembered him with evident warmth as one of the smartest people he had ever worked alongside. Of all the departures MASH experienced, Gary Berghoff's may be the most emotionally layered. He played Radar O'Reilly, the wide-eyed, teddy bear-clutching company clerk whose uncanny intuition and childlike sweetness provided an emotional anchor for the entire series. Radar heard the helicopters before anyone else. He absorbed the chaos of war and somehow remained, at his core, tender. Berghoff was the only cast member who had played his character in the original 1970 film, and he brought to the television version a depth and fragility that the movie never quite captured. He was, in the eyes of many fans, irreplaceable. But playing innocence at war for 7 seasons takes a toll. Berghoff struggled with anxiety and depression throughout much of his time on the show, battles that rarely made headlines, but quietly shaped his experience on set. The production schedule was exhausting, and the emotional demands of the role were relentless. More painfully, the long hours meant significant time away from his family, including a young daughter whose early years he later described as time he could never recover. He sought better contractual terms, more flexibility, reduced appearances, improved compensation. The producers tried to accommodate him, but by season 8, the emotional reservoir was empty. He was done. The show honored his departure with a 2-part farewell episode that is among the most touching in the series' history. Radar's final walk away from the camp, teddy bear left behind on Hawkeye's bunk, was handled with extraordinary care. It didn't feel like a cast change. It felt like losing a friend. After MASH, Berghoff largely retreated from Hollywood. He pursued painting with genuine passion, engaged deeply in wildlife conservation work, and even became an inventor, filing patents for original designs. He rebuilt himself on his own terms, away from cameras and celebrity. His story is ultimately one about the cost of art, and about a man who gave so much of himself to a role that he needed years to quietly reclaim what had been depleted. Larry Linville's Major Frank Burns was one of television's great comic foils, petty, hypocritical, self-righteous, and spectacularly easy to despise. For 5 seasons, he served as the perfect target for Hawkeye's wit and the audience's frustration. Linville played him brilliantly, with a meticulous attention to the character's insecurities that transformed what could have been a simple cartoon into something memorably unpleasant. The problem, as Linville came to recognize clearly, was that Frank Burns had nowhere left to grow. As MASH matured, as its humor grew darker, its moral questions more complex, its characters more psychologically rich, Frank remained frozen in his original configuration. He was the joke that kept repeating. And Linville, an actor of considerable range, understood that the role had reached its ceiling. He departed at the end of season 5 without bitterness, without being pushed, and with a quiet professional dignity. In his own words, he had taken a character as far as it was possible to go. His replacement, David Ogden Steyer's Charles Emerson Winchester III, was constructed on entirely different principles, cultured, brilliant, arrogant, but genuinely complex, and ultimately capable of growth and vulnerability. Winchester's presence pushed MASH into its deepest and most rewarding creative chapter. Linville never found another role with comparable visibility, but his contribution to the show's early identity was enormous. Frank Burns was the friction against which Hawkeye's heroism was sharpened. Looking across all of these exits, a pattern emerges that says something profound about what MASH actually was. Every time a key actor left, the show didn't collapse, it transformed. Henry Blake's death gave it moral gravity. Trapper's disappearance gave it emotional depth. Radar's farewell gave it heartbreak. Frank's exit gave it intellectual complexity. MASH survived and thrived through loss because its creators understood that the show itself was about loss, about the people war takes away, about the gaps that never quite close, about the way life continues even when beloved things disappear. Each departure, whatever its personal cause, became part of the story the show was always trying to tell. The actors who left did so for deeply human reasons: ambition, exhaustion, creative frustration, the need to protect their own well-being, the desire to be seen more fully. Some found what they were looking for. Others did not. But the show they left behind continued to mean something to millions of people. And in the end, that meaning was built as much from the goodbyes as from the hellos.